right, so good to see you tonight. Glad you're here. Boy, Sunday, talking about Amnon and Tamar. We talked that through very well. We spent some extra time there because we needed to. We just needed to kind of work some things through on that. And so quickly we'll be kind of working into chapter 14, but just thinking about these events with Tamar and Amnon is sad again to think about the things that happened there. But also it sets up the events that happen in the next chapters. It's like it's not over. Sometimes when there are bad things that happen or when evil takes place, sin takes place, seems like it's never just over. But that there's more to come. There's consequences that carry us out to another time. And that's what happens here. And again, we're still dealing with, as we see in tonight's lesson, the repercussions of the sins of David. That's still some things that's going on here as we kind of work our way through. And we've talked about, why is that horrible event even in the Bible? Well, because God doesn't hold anything back. There's the good and there's the ugly. And he tells us and shows us both. And there are lessons to be learned from both, just like we're learning lessons from this tonight. You know, one of the things that was a real problem with this event, that what Amnon did to Tamar, was that David didn't respond. That as well sets off a chain of events of some other things that happen that takes us into the next chapters. So there's that going on here too. King David was furious about what happened, but he didn't do anything. And so his son Absalom, I think, becomes more and more convinced that he's the one that is going to have to do something. And we mentioned, maybe David was slow to respond or didn't respond because he himself had made some really bad mistakes. He had committed adultery, and he would have deserved the same kind of punishment, or very similar punishment, as Amnon should have received. And so maybe that was part of the issue, slowing him up and holding him back from responding as he should. But as we were coming to the end of the class on Sunday, there are 2 years that passed where David didn't say anything. And seemingly, Absalom didn't see anything, the brother of Tamar. But after 2 years, Absalom made preparation for the feast. That feast that comes after the shearing of the sheep. And he invited all of his family to come. David didn't come. It'd be too big of a problem, he said, for him to come. And Absalom's anger, that which had been brewing for 2 years, was overflowing now. And he made an arrangement for his servants to kill Amnon. And that kind of takes us into where we're going here tonight. Absalom fled to Geshur. In chapter 13, the latter part of the chapter tells us about this, let's think about this for just a moment, okay? Geshur, this area right here, I don't think it's a town so much as it's a region or an area that he fled to, from Jerusalem. And he's going to stay up there for 3 years. He's estranged from his father and from the rest of his family. Time's really starting to kind of chart up when you start thinking about this here. And there was perhaps some safety for him to go there because he was among kinfolk. And his grandfather was the king in that region right there. I believe it was his mother's people is what it was there. And so he goes there and he's finding some safety. But I think at the same time, the events that had taken place regarding his sister and David's no response is still festering in his mind as the time goes along. Over time, David longed to see his son Absalom. In chapter 13, in the latter part of the chapter there, let's see, in verse 39, and the spirit of the king longed to go to Absalom, for he was consoled concerning Amnon's death. David's feeling a little bit better, and seemingly he was not upset with Absalom for the death of Amnon. But still there's an issue. Still there's some problems there. And he wasn't quick to call Absalom to come back. And so as we get into chapter 14, Joab, one of the king's closest servants, military leader, knew that the king's heart, as chapter 14 says in verse 1, longed for Absalom. So Joab sent someone to Tekoa and had a wise woman brought from there. And he said to her, pretend you are in mourning dress, in mourning clothes, and don't use any cosmetic lotions. Act like a woman who has spent many days grieving for the dead. Then go to the king and speak these words. And Joab put the words in her mouth. So what did Joab have her do? What's the purpose here? What did he tell the woman to do, and what is he trying to accomplish? Do you remember that? What's he doing? What's going on?
I suspect that his own efforts to change David's mind have failed, and he's hoping that an unknown person may be able to reach him with him.
Okay. So there is the fact that this is an unknown person, so maybe that's going to have an effect. Okay, so I think that's one thing.
Kind of like when Nathan came to David after Bathsheba and was talking in this parable or whatever to kind of see what his reaction is going to be. Maybe that's kind of what Joab's doing. He's like, read this little story and see what his reaction is, because it kind of mirrors what is happening between Absalom and Amnon.
I think so.
Will he be received back?
That's right. It's like Joab is saying, well, the king's not listening to me. Maybe he'll listen to someone different. And if she goes, because Joab said, Joab put the words in her mouth, tell this story. This will make him to think and to respond. He's going to respond to you. And the woman came, talking about the problem with her sons, and one son killed the other. Now the other son is having to flee for his life, because of what he did. And the king said, I'll take care of that. David said, I'll take care of that. I'll give an oath where nothing has to happen. And then she went into some more detail, about that. And the king said, I'll take care of that. But finally it became known, and she said, well then, why aren't you taking care of your son Absalom? Why aren't you bringing him home? Protecting him in the same way. And so now it's like, David, what can he say now? He doesn't say it, but it's like, okay, now I get it. And then so he called for Absalom to come home. And so, all right, so some years have passed now, in this event. Absalom's going to come home, so to speak, but everything is just not great, even still. Everything's not going to be just fine here, in this event. So there was 2 years of kind of silence before Absalom killed Amnon. Now, there's been 3 years that Absalom has been away, so we're at 5 years. But now this woman has convinced David to call, Absalom home. And like verse 21 of chapter 14 says, and the king said to Joab, very well, I will do it. Go and bring the young man Absalom. Bring him home. But even at that, that's not all there is to that story. Verse 22 says, Joab fell with his face to the ground to pay him honor. And he blessed the king. And Joab said, today your servant knows that he has found favor in your eyes, my lord the king, because the king has granted his servant's request. It's like Joab is saying, this is what I've been wanting all along. This is what I've been trying to do. But he had to have this woman to help get this accomplished and to get it done. But still, that's not all to the story. There's a restriction still. And so Joab, verse 23, Joab went to Gishar and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king said he must go to his own house. He must not see my face. So Absalom went down to his own house and did not see the face of the king. So I wonder, what exactly has been accomplished here? And how is this going to work out? I mean, what do you kind of think, just from the surface level? How's this going to go? I mean, has anything been resolved? It's not a reconciliation. You see, so that really hasn't happened. And why exactly? I don't know what I can say. Exactly, why is it this way? But what we have to start thinking about as we start looking at the story, okay, so there's more to the story. And this is not going to help the situation. Absalom, I think, already has some other ideas in his mind about some things that he wants. And even because of who he is, some things that would happen eventually in time. I mean, he's in line for the throne. And so that's something that's coming. But he has no relationship really with his father. And any love that was there seemingly is lost. Absalom wants to see David. Look at verse 25. There's a little more here. Let's see verse 25. In all Israel, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. Whenever he cut the hair on his head, he used to cut his hair from time to time, when it became too heavy for him, and he would weigh it. And its weight was 200 shekels by the royal standard. That's a bunch of hair. And why is this even shared? He's a handsome man. What does that have to do with anything? Or does it? Why is that shared with us, you think? What's the idea or purpose of telling us these things about Absalom?
I think it sets you up for what's coming next.
It's kind of a precursor, maybe, of some things to come. But still, why? Why is it telling us that he's a handsome man? Lance?
He's probably a very handsome and charismatic man. One reason he was able to steal the hearts of Israel's, and the reason he describes how long it is because it's foreshadowing what's going to happen to him.
It is kind of foreshadowing some things that are going to come. If we think about David, when he was a younger man, how do we describe him? Ruddy. He was a good-looking man. I mean, he was young. He was strong. How did he win the heart of Israel? On the battlefield. Starting with fighting Goliath. It got the attention of Israel. And they watched David. And he was very much a public figure. And he stood out to everyone that way. And so maybe when we get this description of Absalom, he's a handsome man. His hair is incredible, and it would draw attention and things like that. And there's really more to the hair story as we go along, okay? But people would notice him. And someone said something, too, just about his character, charismatic. I think probably so, as we see as the story goes on. He's not afraid to be in front of people. And maybe we'd say confidence, that he would have confidence, to do this and to be that way. All of that becomes very important because David, his father, the king, is a king that has been very popular, is a king that has been admired. And so if Absalom is to be able to have attention that supersedes that of David, he's going to have to do something. Right? I mean, to have people look at him and to have confidence in him over his father David. But then also, I would say at the same time, what's happening with David now? He's getting older. Yeah, things are changing. He's getting older. He was that young, vibrant man. Good-looking, perhaps charismatic. And now it seems, I think maybe we said it even Sunday with regard to Amnon, David was furious about that. But he didn't respond. He didn't do anything. It's like he's undecisive. And that's probably not a good trait for the king. And so things are changing some in that way with David. Absalom, on the other hand, he's decisive. I'm not saying he always does the right thing, but he's decisive. He's going to do something. He's going to take action.
It's the same thing to see here, because as far as I remember, the whole rest of David's story is something of a bit of a decline. He just kind of sinks into impotence as his sons squabble around him, and just kind of finds out the rest of his life. Not merely the kind of dynamic, zealous man of God that we always kind of imagine him to be.
Perhaps there's more to it, but I can't help but make the connection to his sin with Bathsheba. That is from that point on that some things have changed. David's not only not the same king, but seemingly he's not the same man. I mean, there is still this desire to serve God and submit himself to God. But it just seems like David struggles with a lot of things. And maybe the lesson for us is that, maybe a couple of lessons. If our heart is tender and we sin, it changes us. It's hard. And you wonder sometimes if David was ever able to just fully get over what he did. We've read some of the Psalms. There's several Psalms where David is repentant and he confesses his sin and he pleads to God for forgiveness. It seems like he just struggled to get past what he did. Well, sin will hurt us and change us. But also what we have to understand, that when sins are forgiven, we need to pick up and move on. And I'm just not sure David was able to fully do that. I've wondered about that. Maybe I'm reading too much in that. But just to think about it. But going on here in the text, in verse 27 it says, 3 sons and 3 daughters were born to Absalom. The daughter's name was Tamar, just like his sister. It's a different Tamar. And she became a beautiful woman. Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the king's face. Then Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king, but Joab refused to come to him. So he sent a second time, but he refused to come to him. And then he said to his servants, "Look, Joab's field is next to mine and has barley there. Go set it on fire." So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab did go to Absalom's house and said to him, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" And Absalom said to Joab, "Look, I sent word to you and said, 'Come here so I can send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me if I were still there. Now then, I want to see the king's face, and if I'm guilty of anything, let him put me to death.' So Joab went to the king and told him this. Then the king summoned Absalom. He came in and bowed down with his face to the ground before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. And so there seems to be a reconciliation, but kind of. Everything is still just really good. And so this is the story as it's kind of unfolding here. And boy, it's about to go not so well. Absalom's attitude toward David is not good. The inaction of David regarding Tamar and then the long estrangement between them has not helped the situation there at all. And then maybe, I think we've touched on this, but now I think we got to think about it. Maybe there's another side to Absalom. We think about how he's responding and what he's doing. There's another side here to Absalom. He's the next in line for the throne. And these delays have kept him from ascending to this position on the throne, and he's getting frustrated by that. David doesn't necessarily have to die for Absalom to ascend to the throne. Sometimes, even in history, we're going to see in the divided kingdom where a son starts serving even before the father dies, And so the situation here, Absalom, I think, is getting impatient, about that. And his relationship with his father is not so good. So we have 2 years from the rape of Tamar till he killed Amnon. Absalom spent 3 years in Geshur. And then another 2 years in Jerusalem when he didn't even see his father. That's 7 years. 7 years of a relationship not being good and things not going in the direction that you think they should go. 7 years is kind of a long time. And I think patience here with Absalom is kind of gone. And yet I say that. And he's going to start working a plan, but this plan even is going to take 4 more years. And so he's patient enough, or maybe just politically astute enough to know that if he's going to ascend to the throne over his father David, he's going to have to really do some things to get the attention of people. And I think that's what's going to have to happen. We get into chapter 15, and Absalom starts working the crowd, we might say, is what he's doing. Get into chapter 15. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. Why did he do that? 50 men, what's the purpose here of 50 men running in front of him? Yeah, you don't get people's attention this way. What would they think he is? He's important. They know he's not the king, but he's like a prince. And this is going to get attention for sure, doing this. It's interesting that he got himself a chariot. It wasn't something that was provided for him, seemingly, but he took this on himself, to do this. Verse 2, and he would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" And he would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king here to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or a case would come to me, and I would see that he gets justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king and asked for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Pretty smooth, huh? You talk about a politician. He knew how to win the hearts of the people, and that's exactly what he's doing. And he did this for 4 years. For 4 years, he is working this and playing this out. And so this story, we're going to read some more because this story is it's unfolding before us right here. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living in Geshur in Aram, I made this vow. If the Lord brings me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." Well, I can't help but wonder, is that really true? Is that really a vow he made, or is this just an excuse now to do this? Maybe I shouldn't be so cynical about that, but I do wonder about those things. But here's what's going on. And the king said, "Go in peace." So Absalom went to Hebron. Verse 10, then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel, the Gileadite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. And so I said, maybe I shouldn't be doubting him so much. Maybe I shouldn't think there's a conspiracy. But you know what? That's basically what it says, doesn't it?
I feel like it all, like when those first 2 years started, it's almost like he was waiting for his dad to step up and be a dad, and he didn't. And so he just got madder and madder. It was like, well, if you're not going to be the grown-up here, somebody's got to be the grown-up here. And he decided he's going to take his own little path to be the grown-up. And he's starting to plot and take over for his dad. That's where I feel like it kind of, we get let down by our idols sometimes. We're like, well,
we're disappointed. I'll do my own thing. We keep talking about, for those who are teaching next quarter this material in the youth classes, are you making some notes of some things that you want to make sure you talk about? And we think about the relationship here between the Father and the Son, and how there were problems and issues that were not talked about and not discussed, and how things just got worse and worse. And we need to be taking note of those things. And then we have to talk about, Absalom as well, being a man of questionable character. That he's going about some things behind his father's back for his own personal interests. And that's not good. That's not a good thing. And we need to be able to see those things and to talk about those things. And so 4 years have passed. Absalom's ready to make his move, and he's pretty bold. He's pretty bold to be doing these things, and his conspiracy, it gains strength. His following kept on increasing. So much so that word is going to come to David, and he knows that he has to leave Jerusalem. That the throne is going to be challenged by his son. And David is going to have to flee from Jerusalem. And so now we start seeing this part of the story, and you have to think about it. What does this feel like to David? How does this feel to David, you suppose? Familiar? Yeah, he's familiar. And the times he was having to flee Saul. But who would have thought when he became king that would happen? Oh, but kings are challenged all the time. I've always thought when you read through some of these kingship battles, and I've always thought, who would really want to be king? Because there's always someone trying to kill you. But your son, that has to hurt in a special way, I would think. That his son is wanting to kill him. And so that's what's unfolding now. Right?
I know that Saul is long gone by now, but I think I see, at least for me, I see a parallel between Saul and David as the dangers of inaction. Like Saul spent a quarter of his reign hunting down David. Now David spent 11 years seemingly doing nothing. It isn't recorded that he consulted God. 2 years of ignoring Tamar's rape, 3 years of thinking about Absalom and not doing anything about it, 2 years of ignoring him whenever he was in Israel.
Right.
The dangers of being stagnant, of being impotent, not doing anything.
Right. And again, tell me, what do we need to be taking away from this?
This whole period doesn't look like anybody's talking to God.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Lance brought this up. We haven't read in this text anywhere where he consulted God. What should I do? Okay, so we see that as a problem. What else should we be taking away from this? We mentioned some of it already, but say it again. What should we be taking away from this? Ignoring issues? Ignoring an issue is not going to make it any better. We've got to deal with issues. Sin, in particular, we have to deal with. And in family relationships, when things have turned upside down, lack of communication is not going to make it better. And that problem's just going to get worse and fester. So you see, there's some things that I hope become takeaways for us.
There's a neat little minor point that someone else pointed out to me in this episode here. You kind of see as part of a background progression throughout David's lifetime, especially, is as when David has to get out of Jerusalem here. We read down in 17, 18, 19, 20, and further on, you have a
to stand with David in this way. You know, it's interesting here as we look at verses 15 and following. This is when David is getting the word. You know, okay, things have hit this worst point scenario. A messenger came and told David the hearts of men of Israel are with Absalom. And then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and ruin us, bring ruin upon us and put the city to the sword. And the king's officials answered him, your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses. The king set out with his entire household, following him, left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. And so the king set out with all the people following him. They halted at a place some distance away. And so there's these who are traveling along with him. Some even seemingly who are foreigners who are coming along with him. And he has an army of 600 that have come with him. David seems to be somewhat surprised even of their loyalty, that they are there and that they are with him. So we see that while Absalom has won the hearts of Israel, not all the hearts, that there is still a great following for David. And that's going to be proven more as time goes on. There are still those who are willing to listen to the king and to follow him. And I think still recognize him as God's appointed. You think about how disappointing this would have been to David. His son is trying to usurp him. He's having to leave Jerusalem. He had to kind of work and fight his way there. And now he's having to leave, knowing that he has to do so fast before the city comes under siege. And so now here he is, you know, try to imagine, if you can get this picture in our mind of David coming outside the city walls of Jerusalem. There's an entourage with him, those who are going ahead and those who are behind, those who have been loyal to David. But imagine the sight of the people following David as he is leaving. And as word spreads out through the countryside, there are those who come out to see him. And let's talk about one here in verse 19. The king said to Ittai, the Gittite, why should you come along with us? Go back and stay with Absalom. You are a foreigner, an exile from your homeland. This is what Thane was talking about now. You came only yesterday, and today shall I make you wander about with us when I do not know where I'm going? Go back, take your countrymen. May kindness and faithfulness be with you. But Ittai replied to the king, surely as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether it mean life or death, there your servant would be. Boy, that's allegiance, isn't it? What allegiance that they are expressing for David as the king. And so they went on. And then in verse 23, the whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the desert. So coming out across the Kidron Valley, you know, on the east side of Jerusalem, there's kind of a drop-off there. It's a small valley. You know, the Mount of Olives there on the other side. And if we can imagine and just kind of picture David as he's having to leave Jerusalem, walking through that valley and up the Mount of Olives on that side, fleeing from those who are his enemy, those who want to put him to death. Reminiscent of any other story that comes along. We think about Jesus in the Mount of Olives, praying to the Father, let this cup pass. But if it's your will, you know, he was willing to die. Interesting that it's just some of the same places that these things are happening right here. David, and then Jesus, the one who would sits on David's throne. Interesting things there just to think about. You have thoughts, comments you want to add to this? Back in chapter 12, remember?
That, you have to remember, maybe he's not making a motion, wanting to incur more bad things that happen to him. So maybe the inactivity was saying, well, if I keep it at bay, it's not going to touch my family.
Yes, that's a good point. Remember, Nathan the prophet had said, here's what God has said. The sword is never going to leave your house. There's going to be trouble that comes. And could some of David's inactivity be just that he's trying not to ripple the waters in some way, to bring any bad things on him, but the inactivity has not been useful. Matt?
I can't help but picture when Michael, is that his wife's name, made fun of him because he was so joyful, he was dancing and basically made a fool of himself in her eyes in front of everyone. And then how different this is. It's only loss and depressing, starting with Bathsheba, the loss of his child there, the loss of Amnon then, the separation from his other son, and then later he basically, as he says, as he's coming back out on top after this Amnon thing, or the battle thing, he says, am I even the king of Israel at this point? And you're just sadness after sadness. It's hard to reconcile the joy that we see in so much of David's life and that sadness. It's hard. But that's what often happens in life.
It is hard. I think it's hard for us to see this. There's going to be some things that change and kind of come back around. But even in one who has God in his heart, is still facing some hard things in life. Some of them are some things maybe he's brought on himself, but still, having a heart for God does not mean that all of a sudden everything works just fine. There are still challenges and difficulties that come to us. Let's see. We have those in the latter part, verses 25 and following, that are ready to, follow him. David starts putting together, I think, if we could say, a bit of a spy system. It happens among the priests. In verse 25, the king said to Zadok, take the ark of God back into the city. This is Abiathar and Zadok had come out of the city with David, with the ark of the covenant, were offering sacrifices. David's now saying, okay, go back to the city. That's where you need to be. Take the ark there with you. And he says, if I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, then he will bring me back and let me see his dwelling place again. But if he says, I am not pleased with you, then, I love this now. If this is God's will, he'll bring me back. If this is God's will, he'll bring me back. And if that's so, then I'm ready. Let him do to me whatever seems to be good to him. This is where David has resolved himself and found peace. Whatever God sees to be right and best, that it will be. The king said to Zadok the priest, aren't you a seer? Go back to the city in peace, and your son Ahimaaz and Jonathan, son of Abiathar. You and Abiathar, take your two sons with you. I will wait at the fords in the desert until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar took the ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, his head covered, and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too, and were weeping as they went up. And David had been told, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, O Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel to foolishness. Here we are still, Mount of Olives, just leaving Jerusalem. And one of David's most trusted counselors turns on him. Interesting what we were saying about David in that location, and that there's a time we think about Jesus in the same location. And it was in that same place that Jesus had to face one of his conspirators when Judas turned on him, remember? Okay, we're going to try to take up there on Sunday, looking at chapters 16, 17, 18. That's where we're going on Sunday. Thank you.